Sidney Poitier was the most well-known black celebrity in Hollywood in 1967. Then he disappeared. Nothing, no TV series, no films. For 6 years in a row. His buddies were unable to get through to him. What's crazy? It took place immediately following his historic 3 successful films in 1 year. What actually transpired that caused him to flee from stardom while he was at the top? The response will make you unable to talk. In Miami, Florida, on February 20, 1927, Sidney Poitier was born. Reginald and Evelyn, his parents, had come from Cat Island in the Bahamas to market tomatoes. He was small and frail when he arrived, and his father wasn't sure he would live. In anticipation of the worst, he even purchased a small coffin. In spite of everything, Sidney managed to survive. His parents brought him back to Cat Island, where things were hard but straightforward. No running water, no power, and no paved roads were present. His family fished and grew their own food to support themselves. Money was hard to come by. Sidney, like a lot of impoverished kids, wore clothing made from flour bags. There wasn't much to learn at the small school he attended when he could. By the age of 12, he had given up on going to school. He needed to work. When Sidney was around 11 years old, his family relocated to Nassau. It was the first time he had ever seen a city and his reflection in a glass window. He saw his first films there as well. He was captivated by the large screens, the lights, and the performers. However, Nassau was also dangerous. His future was a concern for his parents. Particularly after one of his pals from boyhood was sent to a reform institution. Sidney might suffer the same fate, they feared. He departed for Miami at the age of 15 to join his older brother. He had never encountered racism in the Jim Crow South like he did. Segregation governed everything. There were jobs he couldn't have, places he couldn't go, and laws that didn't make sense. His job was delivery boy. However, the cops posed the true threat. One night, he was followed for 35 blocks by 5 white officers. He had done nothing illegal. There was nothing he had done. He was aware of the consequences if they caught him, though. He needed to get out. He arrived in New York City with virtually little money at the age of 16. There, he had no friends, family, or lodging. On park benches and rooftops, he slept. And within bus stops. He occasionally found refuge in an orphanage when he was fortunate. However, the New York winter was harsh, and he was at a loss for what to do. Because he was homeless, he was repeatedly arrested for vagrancy. He came up with another desperate escape route. After lying about his age, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He ended himself working with psychiatric patients at a veterans hospital after being sent there. It was a horrible situation. He witnessed procedures that horrified him and that he couldn't bear to be involved in. He made up a mental condition because he had to go away. It succeeded. They let him go. When he returned to New York, he was still homeless and struggling. Acting, however, was his new objective. For the American Negro Theater, he went to try out. It didn't go smoothly. He had trouble reading the screenplay. Directors laughed at his strong Caribbean accent. Feeling ashamed, he turned to go. However, he persisted. He would pick up the skills if reading was the issue. He washed dishes at a restaurant at night when an old Jewish waiter saw him struggling. The man volunteered to instruct him. After work, they got together and reviewed newspaper words. Sidney spent every evening practicing. Learning punctuation, learning to sound out letters, and learning speech patterns from radio broadcasts. Months later, he gave it another go. He entered the American Negro Theater again, prepared. They didn't laugh this time. In 1950, Sidney Poitier played his first significant part in No Way Out. In addition to being a significant step forward for him, this was a daring move in Hollywood. Many studios at the time avoided the story that Joseph L. Mankiewicz's picture told. Dr. Luther Brooks, a young black physician who was accused of killing a white patient, was portrayed by Poitier. The truth is rejected by Ray Biddle, the patient's brother, who is portrayed by Richard Widmark. A violent race riot results from his prejudice, which exacerbates the situation. This movie was notable because it directly addressed racism. A black guy in a position of leadership was depicted, which was uncommon in movies at the time. Poitier gave an impactful performance. He portrayed an intelligent, competent, and morally resolute persona. It was unusual for audiences to witness black actors in such positions. Their perception of them was one of comedic relief, servants, or supporting roles. No Way Out made a strong impression by contesting that. On film, Poitier and Widmark were deadly rivals, yet they ended up being close friends. Their relationship continued for years, and Widmark appreciated Poitier's skill. The movie was all the more important because of this clash between fact and fiction. Although it was a representation of the nation's actual racial tensions, it also demonstrated that change was achievable. Playing parts that perpetuated stereotypes was not something Poitier was interested in. He made choices. Hollywood continued to give black actors shallow roles in the 1950s and 1960s. As criminals, servants, or supporting characters, they were frequently portrayed in literature. Poitier wouldn't accept parts that weren't worthy. It was more than just a matter of pride. He was aware that his roles influenced the way that black people were perceived in the real world. His alternatives were reduced by this choice. In Hollywood, he was considered challenging by some. Some members of the black community thought he was too cautious and inclined to portray virtuous individuals rather than a more diverse spectrum of black realities. However, Poitier had a plan. Every part he played would either support or contradict Hollywood's portrayal of black males, he was aware. He decided to dispute it. He collaborated with filmmakers such as Stanley Kramer and Martin Ritt who shared his viewpoint. He selected movies that addressed pressing problems. He was no longer merely an actor as a result. He turned into an emblem of advancement. Later performers like Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington adopted the norm he set by demanding greater roles, which encouraged other black actors to perform. In 1951's Cry, The Beloved Country, Poitier's dramatic prowess was on full display. This movie, which was based on Alan Paton's book, chronicled racial injustice in South Africa during the apartheid era. Reverend Stephen Kumalo, a black clergyman in Johannesburg looking for his son, was portrayed by Poitier. The film revealed South Africa's profound racial divisions, and Poitier's performance added to its emotional impact. Poitier was then once more in the spotlight in 1955 thanks to Blackboard Jungle. In this movie, a high school teacher attempted to manage a group of unruly kids. Gregory Miller, portrayed by Poitier, was a bright but disobedient student. The movie offered a startling view at urban classrooms. By using rock all day and night, it also contributed to the popularization of rock and roll. Through his Comets and Bill Haley. There was more to both movies than just amusement. Apartheid received widespread notice thanks to Cry, The Adored Nation. Discussions about racial and socioeconomic issues in American schools were prompted by Blackboard Jungle. Poitier was more than a mere actor. He was facilitating conversations. His band, The Defiant Ones, made history in 1958. Two inmates' stories were told in the movie. Two people, one white and one black, escaped while chained together. As the white prisoner, Tony Curtis portrayed the role. Playing Noah Cullen was Poitier. Their characters were initially antagonistic. They were forced to cooperate with one another. Their relationship evolved gradually. That was the film's main source of impact. It was more than just a jailbreak. Racial boundaries were to be broken. The film, which was directed by Stanley Kramer, was released when segregation was still permitted in several U.S. states. Audiences saw something different as a result. There was trust between a white man and a black man. It's possible that they are equals. In 1958, that was audacious. It was an outstanding performance by Poitier. He was intelligent, human, and strong. A main role in a major motion picture like this had never before been offered to a black actor in Hollywood. He was nominated for a 1959 Academy Award for Best Actor because of how impressive his work was. For the first time, a black male actor received a nomination in that particular category. Even though he lost, the nomination was historic in and of itself. Poitier was already well known in the industry when David Niven won that year for Different Tables. He was more than just a gifted actor now. He was a pioneer. He starred in A Raisin in the Sun in 1961, first on Broadway and later in the movie version. The play, which was written by Lorraine Hansberry, was the first significant production to highlight the difficulties faced by a black family as seen by them. Prior to that time, black characters in Hollywood were typically viewed through a white perspective. Walter Lee Younger, portrayed by Poitier, was a guy who was determined to get out of poverty and give his family a better life. Walter Lee's impatience, ambition, and sadness were all perfectly conveyed by his portrayal. The play was a big hit. It addressed the actual challenges that black families faced on a daily basis. In 1961, Daniel Petrie directed a Hollywood adaptation of it. Poitier continued playing the part, bringing the same level of passion to the screen. In Chicago, where segregation was not legally enforced, the movie was set. However, it remained a societal reality. Audiences were forced to reflect. The movie went on to become a classic, and Poitier was nominated for a Golden Globe for his performance. Its influence was demonstrated in 2005 when the Library of Congress chose to preserve it in the National Film Registry. In 1963, Lilies of the Field followed. The role that created history was this one. Homer Smith, portrayed by Poitier, is a traveling handyman who encounters a community of nuns in the desert of Arizona. He was sent by God, they believe, to build them a chapel. Initially, he opposes. However, he begins to alter. He stays. The chapel is built by him. It was a silent, modest, and profoundly touching film. Homer was portrayed by Poitier with dignity and affection. There was merely a man doing something decent, there was no major dramatic scene. Because he desired to. At the 36th Academy Awards on April 13, 1964, he was awarded the Best Actor Oscar for the performance. The first black man to receive that honor was him. It marked a sea change. He gave a straightforward and sincere acceptance speech. Thanking all who had assisted him, he appreciated the arduous journey that had brought him to this point. Hollywood was gradually evolving. Poitier was aware that winning an Oscar didn't instantaneously change things. He continued to drive. He played the lead in two 1967 movies that addressed racism in America in various ways. Stanley Kramer's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was the first. Poitier portrayed Dr. John Prentice, a prosperous black physician who was betrothed to a white woman. How their families responded to the relationship was examined in the movie. It was released only a few months after the Supreme Court declared in Loving v. Virginia that interracial marriage was acceptable nationwide. The timing added to its impact. Poitier's role was deemed too ideal by some critics, who thought the movie was trying to make him a flawless black guy in order to appeal to white viewers. But the message was unmistakable. Racial boundaries shouldn't apply to love. The second movie was called In the Heat of the Night. In the Norman Jewison-directed film, Poitier portrayed Detective Virgil Tibbs, a Philadelphia-based black police officer who becomes entangled in a murder case in the Deep South. Rod Steiger portrays the town's police chief, who is overtly racist. There was a lot of suspense and intensity throughout the movie. The slap of Virgil Tibbs by a wealthy white man is among its most well-known incidents. The script had him smacked back, thanks to Poitier. That was a potent moment. An African-American man refusing to back down. Both films were huge hits. At the Academy Awards, In the Heat of the Night won Best Picture. Poitier had shown that movies addressing race might be successful at the box office. He was more than just a performer, he was a power. There was nothing Hollywood could do but change. His career had ensured that, but success came with strain. He was more than just an actor, he represented advancement. Black Americans' perceptions could be influenced by the positions he selected. He avoided choosing characters that perpetuated stereotypes in favor of ones who were intelligent and respectful. This obligation extended beyond the movie. He joined Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and took part in demonstrations as a prominent advocate for civil rights. He was observed and evaluated for everything he did, both on and off screen. Some black intellectuals began to oppose him by the late 1960s as the civil rights movement grew increasingly militant. His personalities were too ideal, almost unreal, in their opinion. His image was frequently one of nobility, authority, and non-threateningness. According to others, these parts were created less to represent actual black life and more to reassure white audiences. According to critics like Clifford Mason and Pauline Kael, Poitier had been forced into a wholesome cliché. Why does white America adore Sidney Poitier? Is Mason's piece, found in the New York Times on September 10, 1967, charged Poitier with portraying an unattainable ideal of black masculinity. He said Poitier was only acceptable by Hollywood because he was a safe black man who never questioned white comfort. Mason was particularly critical of Poitier's performance as Virgil Tibbs in the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night. In particular, the moment in which Tibbs smacks a white bigot was revolutionary, but Mason felt that the character lacked nuance. He didn't have any romantic interests or personal problems, making him feel more like an idealized version of himself than a genuine human being. This critique wounded Poitier. Mason's article was later described by him as the most unjust and damaging piece of journalism he had ever seen. He was aware that Hollywood was a slow-moving target, but he also recognized the boundaries of his accomplishment. "I can't believe that, out of 20 million Negroes, I, Sidney Poitier, am the only one with filmmaking talent," he once remarked. He had a genuine friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was founded on a common struggle for civil rights and genuine admiration. Poitier was among the most well-known black actors in Hollywood by the early 1960s. He had the option to ignore the conflict and concentrate solely on his profession. However, he wasn't like that. He realized that his success had given him a voice, and he was going to make use of it. Poitier participated in the large-scale March on Washington for Freedom and Jobs on August 28, 1963. To hear Dr. King's speech, over 250,000 people had flocked to the Lincoln Memorial. When King gave his speech, "I Have a Dream," it became history. Poitier was not only another well-known person in the gathering. The people he was standing with had put their lives at danger for this cause. He was present, along with Charlton Heston and Harry Belafonte, demonstrating that Hollywood wasn't merely observing from afar. Poitier was committed to more than just public appearances. He was prepared to risk his life for it. He embarked on a potentially fatal expedition with Belafonte in the summer of 1964. During the Civil Rights Movement, Mississippi's black voter registration drive, known as Freedom Summer, got underway. The state was among the riskiest locations for civil rights advocates in the United States. Volunteers were being attacked by the KKK, and 3 had already been killed in June. Poitier and Belafonte chose to provide the funds themselves because the movement required them to continue. To get to Greenwood, Mississippi, they leased a small Cessna plane and brought $70,000 in cash, which is now worth over $600,000. Their pilot swiftly left them behind as soon as they touched down and sped off. A car was waiting, but they couldn't go far before they noticed headlights coming. Their initial suspicion was that it might be federal agents. Then they recognized the Klan. A frightful pursuit started. They were trying to be forced off the road when the Klan cars crashed into them. Their chauffeur didn't halt. He sped ahead, veering to get away. They were on the verge of failure when a convoy from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee showed up. After the Klan withdrew, Poitier and Belafonte arrived at their destination. In a packed dance hall, Belafonte tossed the money bag on a table. The activists cheered. For people who are arrested for standing up for their rights, the money would cover their legal fees, food, and transportation. Poitier and Belafonte, aware that the Klan was still out there, slept in a modest room under armed security. However, they had fulfilled their destiny. Poitier's advocacy was not limited to the public. It was a part of his everyday existence. His house became a gathering spot for civil rights activists. People like Ossie Davis, Malcolm X, and Ruby Dee were welcomed by his first wife, Juanita. These visits were not informal. During these strategy discussions, the movement's plans were developed. There were actual risks. Poitier and Juanita saw a burning crucifix in their driveway in 1966, following their march in remembrance of James Meredith. A strong indication from those who wished to keep him quiet. However, he never gave up. He continued to use his voice, wealth, and notoriety to advocate for change. Sidney Poitier's career was dramatically altered when he decided to pursue directing. Buck and the Preacher, 1972, his debut feature picture, was not merely a Western. The tale of black tenacity in the post-Civil War era was audacious. Poitier played Buck, a former soldier who led African Americans who had been freed from slavery in the South. Although they were always in danger, his people were seeking a better life in the Kansas area. They were pursued and forced to return to Louisiana by white raiders who were employed by plantation owners. A Western story like this had never been told in Hollywood. In the genre, significant roles were rarely given to black performers, and the problems of emancipated African Americans were hardly ever depicted on screen. Additionally, Buck and the Preacher examined the nuanced relationship between Native Americans and African Americans. It deviated from the cliches typically used by Westerns by showcasing both tense and supportive situations. The production was not simple. The director, Joseph Sargent, was brought in. In a matter of days, however, Poitier concluded he was not a good fit. Sargent's method, in his opinion, lacked the nuance the narrative required. Poitier took over instead of employing a new employee. He took the decision without hesitation, even though he had never directed a movie before. In addition to working on the organization, a 1971 film, he finished filming in 45 days. The movie proved a hit in spite of these obstacles. Critics gave it high marks for historical accuracy, music, and cinematography. The film's legacy turned out to be far more significant than the box office results Columbia Pictures had planned for. Benny Carter, a jazz great, wrote the music, which added even more cultural dimension to the movie. Sonny Terry and Brownie McGhee, two blues performers, were highlighted. Poitier, who incorporated traditional blues music with classic Western themes, devoted the movie to the African American pioneers whose hardships had been forgotten. He wished for their tale to live on. Following his success as a filmmaker, Poitier made a surprising turn. Instead, he moved into comedy instead of creating another drama. 1974's Uptown Saturday Night was Poitier and Bill Cosby's first of three buddy comedies. Two working-class buddies were robbed at an illicit gaming establishment, and the movie followed their story. The true issue? Their stolen wallet contained a winning lotto ticket. Their quest to retrieve it took them into the criminal underside of the city, where they had a number of amusing run-ins. This was no ordinary blaxploitation film. It made fun of it rather than adhering to the standard structure for crime drama. Roscoe Lee Brown, Flip Wilson, and Richard Pryor were among the many comedic icons in the cast. Critics applauded the film's humor and vigor, and audiences adored it. The chuckles were steady and the tempo quick thanks to Poitier's guidance. The film's success at the box office demonstrated that he was equally adept at handling humor and drama. Then Stir Crazy appeared. The movie from 1980 created history. A jail comedy starring Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor was directed by Poitier and went on to become a huge smash. The narrative focused on two unfortunate friends who were wrongfully accused of robbery at a bank and given a 125-year prison term. Every scene was memorable because of Wilder and Pryor's amazing chemistry and their comic timing. It was adored by audiences. Go Insane became the first African-American directed movie to earn over $100 million at the box office. In its first week of release, it brought in a record-breaking $13 million, the largest opening Columbia Pictures had ever witnessed. It was a revolutionary triumph. Poitier demonstrated that a black filmmaker could successfully oversee a major comedy, something Hollywood had never done before. His accomplishment went beyond the figures. In addition to breaking down barriers as an actor, he was also breaking them as a filmmaker. He demonstrated that popular hits that were appealing to all audiences could be made by black directors. Success, scandal, and introspective moments were all part of Sidney Poitier's life. In 1950 and 1976, he married Juanita Hardy and Joanna Shimkus, respectively. His first marriage produced 4 daughters and lasted more than 20 years. However, he had an intense and complex relationship with actress Diahann Carroll during that time. They first connected on the set of Porgy and Bess in 1959. Although Carroll was married to Monty Kaye at the time and Poitier was married to Hardy, their attraction was evident from the first time they met. Poitier went on to say that Carroll was special and that people were attracted to her sexuality and confidence. They had a 9-year affair. They once made the decision to divorce their husbands in order to be together. Carroll went ahead and filed for divorce. Poitier was hesitant. Despite disclosing the affair to Hardy, he decided to remain married for the benefit of their children. Carroll, now unmarried, started dating other men. Poitier was not pleased. He claimed her as his own after a heated exchange. In order to demonstrate his dedication, he bought her a ring and even a 10-room condominium for them to share after he divorced his wife. He did, however, have some conditions. His intention was for them to live together for 6 months prior to getting married. Carroll said no. She was not interested in waiting or according to his schedule. Their split resulted from that argument. They later became friends and looked back on their history with understanding, despite the sad ending of their romance. Poitier's personal hardships frequently mirror his more significant public conflicts. When he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Lilies of the Field in 1964, he became the first black man to do so. Despite breaking down obstacles, he observed that Hollywood continued to be uncooperative. To shift. The lack of diversity at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences drew harsh criticism in the 1960s and 1970s. After years of involvement in the civil rights struggle, Poitier felt compelled to take action. The fact that black performers and filmmakers were not included in the nominations infuriated him. His resignation from the Academy was a protest. He made a strong statement about racial disparity in Hollywood when he left. He was not by himself. In frustration, other black actors, such as Bernie Casey, also resigned. Even though Poitier's resignation did not result in any changes right away, it increased the industry's pressure to change. Later generations were motivated to advocate for greater representation in movies by his legacy of opposing exclusion. Poitier left Hollywood and pursued a career in diplomacy later in life. He was appointed the Bahamas ambassador to Japan in 1997. He was able to represent his parents' country on a global scale thanks to this duty, which gave him new meaning. He was the perfect candidate for the job because he was born in Miami to Bahamian parents and had dual citizenship. Even though he never visited Japan, his contributions improved the two nations' economic and cultural relations. This position he held till 2007. He was still able to make an impact despite removing himself from the ongoing public criticism of his film career because to this change. Poitier never ceased thinking back on his life, even as he transitioned into different roles. He shared his beliefs, lessons, and hardships in two autobiographies. 1980's This Life, his debut. His trip from the Bahamas to Hollywood was the main topic. He wrote of the bigotry he encountered, how his accent was criticized, and how hard it was for him to obtain fulfilling jobs. In an honest admission of his errors, he also disclosed information on his affair with Carol and his marriage to Hardy. It was different with his second book, The Measure of a Man, a spiritual autobiography, published in 2000. His career wasn't the only factor. It was about his spirituality, his ideals, and the events that molded his personality. He talked about the significance of honesty, fortitude, and remaining loyal to oneself in the face of difficulties. The book was warmly received and went on to become a bestseller, giving readers lessons in tenacity and self-improvement in addition to a view into his life. The 2002 honorary Oscar for Sidney Poitier was more than just a prize. It was an homage to the guy who permanently altered Hollywood. Denzel Washington took the stage at the Kodak Theater on March 24 to discuss Poitier's influence. Black performers were frequently used in little parts that could be eliminated from movies prior to him. However, Poitier was unique. It was because of him that films were produced. Speaking politely, Poitier took the stage to claim the prize. He expressed gratitude to the filmmakers who had risked their money on him. When he first came in Hollywood at the age of 22, success seemed unattainable. But 53 years later, he was on the grandest movie stage. Roles that perpetuated negative preconceptions have been avoided by him. Every role he did, he realized, would influence the perception of black performers. His decisions altered the sector. It was not the only momentous night. As the second black actor to win Best Actor for Training Day, Washington made history. Poitier was the first in 1964. Saying, "I'll always be chasing you, Sidney," Washington turned to face him. They had passed the flame. Poitier died on January 6, but his influence went beyond his movies. At the age of 94, tributes were sent in from all across the world. He was described by Oprah Winfrey as a ray of hope. He cleared the path for future generations, according to Barack Obama. Morgan Freeman recalled him as a buddy and mentor. His films were self-evident. During a turbulent time in American history, guess who was invited to supper and talked about social justice and racism in the middle of the night? His work provoked thought. It made them look past their race and into his characters' hearts. Following his passing, many were curious to learn more about the guy who created the mythology. His autobiography, The Measure of a Man, gained popularity once more. A profound thinker who embodied the aspirations of a whole generation was exposed by his words. The documentary Sidney came out that same year. It used his own words to tell his narrative. It demonstrated his significance. He was more than a mere actor. He led. It was impossible to deny his impact on actors such as Washington. They had a brief but impactful first meeting. Poitier told Washington, "You're good," backstage at a show. All he had to hear was that. He would never forget those words. Washington's Oscar victory came after Poitier had already influenced the field. Poitier's honorary award and Washington's victory were inextricably linked. The door was opened by a single man. It had been traversed by the other.